Welcome, welcome, welcome to the living room where we listen, learn, and live together. I'm your host, Richard Martin. Glad you're here. Make yourself right at home. One of my favorite realities about life are the intersecting moments. You know, when cultures connect, when passions align, and when stories blend. One of the places where this happened for me were in my college years and in my graduate school experience. I had the chance to go to one of the most diverse graduate schools in America. And there I was able to see and experience a microcosm of the world, rubbing shoulders with thought leaders who were changing the world, or at least we hope to. And here we are a few years since then, and I've had the chance to watch our special guest as he has grown, matured, and developed, and he is having a significant impact, not just in his corner of the world, but in partnership with some other young global leaders. He is changing the world. He is a thought leader, a perspective shifter. He is an Obama leader for the Obama Foundation, a TEDx fellow. I'm glad to welcome to the living room my friend, an entrepreneur and leader par excellence. He's probably going to get me for saying all this. Please welcome to the living room, Mr. Wandile Mthiyane. What's up, brother?
Yo, thank you very much, man. Thank you for having me, and thank you for not butchering my last name as well.
Oh, it's
Uh,
all good. It's all good, man. Thank you for agreeing to hop on and talk. You know, what's amazing about this conversation is you and I are often having conversations on the side in the wee hours of the morning, often for you because you're normally staying up in time for me to connect with you. And so I'm glad that we're
100%.
able to have this conversation that allows us to connect with one another and allow people to kind of peek in and listen in to some of the themes that we explore on a one-on-one basis, man. How have you been? What's been going on with you?
Man, I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. But it's been a challenging couple of weeks. I just came back from a COVID funeral today,
Hmm.
so just been having to really taking aback and thinking about the idea of death. I lost cousins like 2 weeks ago. I lost my cousin, and then a week after, his mom passed away, and then last
Wow.
Saturday, the 19-year-old son of that same family passed away. So now in that whole family, only like one cousin is left, right? So
Wow.
like all of this happening, boom, 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 boom.
Hmm.
It's just got us thinking. It's like, yo, what's going on? Like COVID is real, and you just there's something about funerals that makes you have existential thoughts about your own life and like, why
Sure.
am I here, what am I doing, what's next, so that's the space I've been in today and recently.
Yeah, man. First of all, my condolences to you and your family. Um, Whenever we lose loved ones, it's already difficult, but I think it's been exacerbated by COVID and the derivatives of COVID, making it difficult to really be in one another's presence and share space
100%.
during this grieving process. And you're right, it does bring with it existential thoughts. We feel our own mortality. So, man, our prayers and our support with you are with you. Um, it's crazy how this has really made the world even smaller. That no matter
Yeah.
where you live, we all share at least this common experience of trying to navigate the terrain of this season. But I want to go back just years before COVID, back to better days, as they say. And that's just life for you growing up in Durban, South Africa. What was that like?
Oh man, very exciting. I grew up in like all stratosphere of
Okay.
neighborhoods in Durban, South Africa. I got to experience a little bit of everything. But I think what stands out and what was most exciting to me was growing up in a informal settlement, so what they call a shanty town in America. When we lived there, there was no architects because everyone was an architect. Whenever a new community member came in, everyone would come together and help them build their home. When your mom is cooking and runs out of onion, you just like send you next door, you run,
Sure.
ask for onion, come back, and she continues cooking. So this idea of community, this idea of Ubuntu, this idea of I am because we are, I really learned it there, and just also just the amazing creativity.
Yeah.
people living in informal settlements are some of the most creative individuals in the world. They can make a house out of
Mm,
anything. So I learned creativity. You see, our houses were too small to play house in, so we were forced to be creative and learn from our parents who were building their own homes.
right.
We'd build our little playhouses right next to our family's home, and it would fall on us, using scrap metals and leftover materials, and eventually it would stand, and we would run, and some would still rise,
Sure.
others beans, other spices, and would cook in these places. Not the most fire safe thing to do, but the food sure tasted good. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So all these experiences, man, made my childhood, but not just my childhood, but the childhood of all the kids within that community.
Mm,
We didn't have the most fancy toys or the latest PS5, but we would come outside and just like use sort of like leftover plastics and wrap it
sure.
around, create a soccer ball and kick it around. And I swear, bro, from that age, like 5, all the cats that I grew up with who played soccer went on to be like some of the elite soccer players,
I believe it,
in the city.
for sure.
And whenever we come back together and talk, it's like, bro, when we went to like middle school and high school, all these kids were just trying to learn the game.
Yeah.
Everyone was catching up to us.
Right.
you know, they knew that like if we were all on the field, like we didn't have anything.
Yeah.
But when it came to soccer, if we were all on the field, you can't touch us.
Most
you
definitely.
still can't touch us.
Hey, listen, I believe it.
but
I don't have
yeah,
anybody's lungs for football.
yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So you mentioned just creativity was born of necessity. Didn't have
100%.
everything that many might be accustomed to now, and many still are not. But you were able to really make the most of what was available to you. Um, and you and I have had the chance to really explore kind of the beauty of that. I think at times from the outside looking in,
Yeah,
a person who might
yeah,
experience a level of privilege would say, oh man, there's not much that can happen when you don't have a lot of resources to begin with. But that wasn't your situation. I get the sense that at times, whereas you were aware of the fact that, hey, we don't have all the resources in the world at our disposal, you were still able to develop this kind of anything is possible approach to life. Some of that was developed just by
yeah.
virtue of growing up, but who else was instrumental in developing that and kind of nurturing that within you?
I'm trying to make an illustration with something that could be similar and understood in the American context.
Sure.
But unfortunately, all your civil rights leaders were killed.
Mhm. A
so
lot of them.
it's a lot. Yeah, sorry, a lot of them. I bet
Mhm.
it's a tough illustration. But think about this. Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years,
Yes.
right? When I'm born, he just becomes recently released, becomes president of South Africa,
Right.
right? So I'm
Mhm.
just thinking of like MLK running for office and like becoming
Yeah.
president around the time you're growing up.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there's like hope in the air. It's like, yo, there's apartheid, there's racism, it's real.
Yeah.
You know, this is where we're coming from. But look at what these folks, you know,
Yeah.
against all odds have been able to do. The
Sure.
fight, right? So there was a great sense of responsibility, even on me coming up, that the baton has been carried over, it's
Right.
being passed on to us. What are we going to do about it? So
Yeah.
motivated by those figures uh, was a huge part. And coming
Yeah.
from a family that was involved in the struggle to fight for apartheid. My grandmother had fought alongside Nelson Mandela. So this wasn't, I didn't wait to go to school to read about this. This is
Right.
what I was told at home
Yeah.
on a daily basis. I remember my mom would make me sit next to her as we would watch the news and they would talk about politics and different
Mhm.
things. And whenever the funny thing, whenever like the political segment of the news on the Zulu radio would come in, they would first play the Martin Luther I have a dream speech,
Sure.
right? I didn't know who MLK was, I didn't know, but I knew that when it was like, I have a dream,
Yeah.
I was like, all right, we're about to talk about real things now. So all like growing up in that environment just created a sense of I can do all things,
Yeah.
you know, and despite the odds. And also, it made me very clear from a young age that there are people who don't like me because of the color of my skin and my
Hmm.
background. There's real racism, and but despite that, I can rise above. And I think that's really helped me a lot in life because I've sort of, when you grow up in that environment, you understand struggle from a very young age.
Yeah.
Uh, it really helps you in life because when everyone's like, "Oh, I didn't think this would be like this," I'm like, "Ah, I already expect it,"
Right.
and you just
Right.
fight through.
So speaking of fighting through, drawing on those early experiences of struggle, you make a decision in your teenage years that you're going to set your sights on furthering your education. Upon the completion of high school, you're going to go to college in the States. Walk us through that process. What were some of the initial inspirations that pointed you towards collegiate studies in the States and the subject matter? You would ultimately pursue architecture. Was it easy? Was it, an overnight experience where, hey, I had the idea, I had the dream, and then it just all came together? Or was it the exact opposite? Did you have to struggle to get here?
Dang, that's like some questions was.
Answer any one
I
of them
will
you want to
say
answer.
this. as, as you were asking this question, like, man, I forgot that I'm being interviewed by Richard Martin. So this is good. This is good.
Whatever, dude.
So much them. So much them. Uh man. All right, let me start with why I chose the path. One, you're growing up in this environment, you're realizing the creativity, but also you're realizing the lack of opportunities for these
Mm,
people to make it. You know, Despite being in this environment, you're realizing there's a straight pipeline to jail,
sure.
right? Like, poor educational system, um, you know, zero role models that have made it. The people we're looking up to are gangsters who would come with their BMW. It was like 3250
Yeah.
with the open thing, and then they'll do like drifts and stuff. And they would go and steal from white neighborhoods, right?
Wow.
But that was actually not frowned upon in my community because it was like, well, reparations.
Yeah. We're taking what's ours.
We're taking what's ours, right? So that's the flip side of the narrative,
Sure.
post apartheid, because we're like, well, we don't feel like any of the changes the government is talking about is actually trickling down to us.
Right.
The rich are still richer. We're still getting poorer. White people till today still own 75% of the economic land in South
Uh-huh.
Africa and resources, etc., when they make less than 10% of the country. So we're like, well, no one cares about us, so
Mm,
we're going to get what's ours. So those are the role models that we had. Um, but I quickly learned that at the key, even at a young age, I quickly learned that at the root of most problems within our low income community was the lack of dignified housing.
okay.
So there was this promise that people would be built homes. I went back there just a month ago in December.
Yeah.
They're still waiting for those homes. And I was 6. And those
Wow.
promises were made in 94, right? There's a backlog of 3 million people. You see, without a dignified house, you don't have a physical address. Without a physical address, you can't apply for a job. Without a job, you don't have money to buy a house, and the cycle of poverty goes on.
Right.
Um, One architect, TED Talker, says that the minimum requirement to have a dream is a dignified place to lay your head.
Have mercy. Have mercy.
Um, Kids couldn't go back to a dignified home and do their homework
Mm,
because you're all living in this one room where it's the dining room, it's the living room, it's the, you know what I mean?
everything in one.
And And then we're like, oh, what's wrong with those kids? Like, why are they so poor grades in that district? I'm
Mm,
like, no, what's wrong with their neighborhoods? Their
mm,
neighborhoods are designed for them to fail. So from then onwards, I wanted to study something that would help me come back and redevelop my community. And eventually, as I grew, I found out about architecture, hence going into architecture. Because again, growing up in that community, I didn't even know what an architect was,
mm-hmm.
you know that word, like what does it mean? Um, so I, finished high school, didn't have money to go to college, started knocking on doors, every company. Actually, I got a full scholarship to study in Durban, but I always wanted to study in the United States because
Right.
I, I felt like if we learn from already developed countries, we'll be able to accelerate our own development.
Mm-hmm.
So knocking and just rejection after rejection after rejection. Eventually, I walked into the mayoral parlor one day, and the mayor was there, and he actually walked in while I was in there. He's like, man, who is this kid? His right hand man at the point knew him. He's like, oh, this is another kid we need to help. So
Yeah.
he turns to me, and he's like, hey, who's your father? And if you know anything about Durban politics, that takes you a long way. I was like, I told him, but he had no idea who that guy was. So he gave me a second chance. He's like, why do you want to go study in the United States when we could just pay for you to study at University of Cape Town or University of Durban, etc. And I told him, like, man, look, if we all study in the same institutions, we're bound to think in a similar way, which then
Wow.
stunts the growth of the country. But if some of us can go overseas and learn how they've been able to do it and combine it with our local ingenuity, we'll be able to accelerate and develop not just Durban, but South Africa as a whole. So
Mm.
it gave me a smile of affirmation, turns to his right hand man and says, go to the Mayoral Golf Awards, the Mayoral Business Awards, and put all of this together and let this kid go through. And that's how I was able to start my journey at Andrews and meet folks like you.
So when
It was
you
a huge
arrived,
answered prayer. And I remember when I was telling,
no, please go ahead.
yes, no, I was just saying, I remember when I was telling my parents, I remember when I was telling my parents to go study high school in Zimbabwe and college in America, they started chuckling. And I was like, yo, why are you guys laughing? Aren't you all the ones who taught me about faith? And,
Yeah.
I was this naughty kid who was like, well, let me put everything that I'm being taught at summer school to test. I'm like, well, if
Mm.
God is real, and if it says that I can do all things, it didn't say some, it said all things through
Yeah.
Christ who gives me strength, then I'll be able to come out of this special class and be the best students in this primary middle school. And
Yeah.
then I'll be able to go and study in Zimbabwe even though we didn't have money. And then I'll be able to study in America even though we didn't have money. And I'll actually be able to change the world and make an impact, even though I come from a place where we're designed not to be able, that is designed for me not to be able to succeed at all.
Wow.
So I think my life has been me constantly putting, that verse to test, at least for the most part.
Yeah. So when you arrived in Berrien Springs, Michigan, was there a sense of culture shock? What was your experience like when you first stepped foot on Andrews University campus?
This is this is about to be funny. So I flew in Chicago. So also this again, bro, think about this like this, kid from a poor neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, first flight in my life is the flight from Johannesburg to Chicago.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking to myself, like all those kids were laughing at me. I was like, "Oh, you've never flown to Joburg." I'm like, "Bro, I'm going to Chicago."
Right.
18 hours later, and I remember like almost being teary-eyed walking into the tunnel. Like, man, I may never come back. I was
For
like,
sure.
yo, I don't know what happened. It's like a whole new chapter in the new world. Like,
Yeah,
my
literally.
family left. My family left me there, and I was waving. I was like, oh, I don't know. I got in, left. I'm 18. I arrived in Chicago. As I arrived in Chicago, I was studying town original planning at the local university at the time.
Okay.
And I'm looking at this like these patterns, like, oh, this is what I studied about this, and then I see the snow, I think, yo, snow, like, thinking of Home Alone. I was like, yo, I'm like, yo, this is about crazy.
Right.
And I arrive, but as soon as the door opened, bro, the cold. I was like,
Oh,
nah, I don't like snow. I instantly changed my mind. I was like, ah. So I walked through into the tunnel and kind of figured my way out. So anyway, fast forward, I get to Mile Hall. It's night, so I can't see much. I'm like,
hmm
man, I made it. You know, when you go to a new place and a new country, things like smell plays a significant role. Like things smell different, you
definitely.
know?
Yeah, I feel
For
you.
some reason, I remember like the smell of the place. And yeah, like when I walk in, there were a couple of cats who were like student deans
Sure.
and RAs who were left in the dorm. They had me put my stuff. As soon as I got to sit down, it's New Year's Eve. We were about to watch the ball drop. I was like, "Hey guys, before we watch this, I just have a quick question. I just came from Africa, so where's Megan Good?"
Point me in her direction, please.
Yeah. Yeah, they started laughing, bro. They're like, bro, if that's why you came here,
Right, right, right. That's rich.
you'll be disappointed.
She's not in Berrien Springs, we can tell you that much. And you can't walk to where she lives either. So you arrive on campus, dead of
Yeah,
winter, and Southwest Michigan, Berrien Springs, it doesn't get cold. It gets cold, all capital letters, like freezing. It's no sun at times. I mean, it's just the polar opposite, no pun intended, of Durban, South Africa, right?
100%.
And then you've come to pursue a degree in architecture, which at least in America and in the West is not, of course there is diversity, but it is not what's the
Yeah,
word? It's not as brown and as
the most.
black as other professions. So did you encounter any perceived or even verbalized expressions of low expectations, either from your peers or from your professors? Did people kind of say architecture like you, like, and how did you manage that if you did encounter it?
You're going in, man. Uh, so, yeah, architecture is not diverse at all. There's 500 Black women licensed architects in America.
Mm,
There's more members of Congress than there are licensed Black women in
wow.
architecture. About between 1 and 3,000, uh, Black licensed architects in total, something like that. So it's bad. I remember coming in. Okay, so here's another thing I realized. The the struggle in South Africa and the struggle in America differs here.
Okay.
I came in as a majority from my country.
Mm,
So I came in with confidence. I'm like, I am Zulu. You can't tell me nothing. And I know who I am. I know what I'm about and I know
for
what
sure.
I'm doing.
For sure.
And not to throw shade, I didn't always get that level of confidence from my, fellow African American brothers.
Hmm.
And it makes sense as I learn more. It's just, you know, stripped away from their history in a majority white community where they're constantly made to feel like they're in borrowed land,
Hmm.
right? And but I was different. I didn't have that, and I think
Hmm.
that's was the blessing that I came with. And also, I'm coming from South Africa, so like I have a PhD in like racism. I remember I'll be walking around campus with my friend Jake. We would bump into a professor or their aunt or their cousin or whatever,
Yeah.
and we'd introduce ourselves. It's like, oh my, this is my friend Wandile. He's really cool. He's from South Africa. It's like, oh, cool, cool, cool. It's like, yeah. So what's your major? And I was like, oh, I'm architect. He's like, architecture.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, architecture. I was like, and I got pissed. I used to get angry. I was like, why wasn't it surprising when Jake said he's
Right.
studying architecture? But whenever I say that I'm studying
Yeah.
architecture, oh, that's very impressive.
Right.
That's that's very good. Like,
Hmm.
yo, I used to get mad at that because I could see I could see the racism that I'm not expected to study such, I guess
Sure.
a prestigious uh, subject. And but all of that's coming from my community where, I'm here to get well minds just fueled me to I was like, I'm going to have to be better than Jake now.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I'm just going to have to like do the most and take over. So now when we get introduced, it's like, oh, this is my friend Wandile. We both study architecture. He's like, oh, you study architecture? I was like, no, actually, I'm the president of
Right.
the school of
Yeah.
architecture.
Yeah.
You know, they really solidify the idea that we also belong.
So while there, you begin to nurture the leadership acumen that was already in you in South Africa. I want to be clear on that. And you have more opportunities to kind of have it matured and nurtured in an environment where, as you've just shared with us, there wasn't always an initial reception of the idea of a brother from South Africa coming to Berrien Springs, Michigan, of all places, to take up architecture. And now you're saying, okay, I can't just do well in terms of my markings, but I also want to establish myself as a leader on campus. And that begins to happen. In addition to excelling and completing your undergraduate degree, if I'm not mistaken, you completed your master's at Andrews as well, right?
100%. Yep.
Okay. So you complete your master's there. Now, at what point do you get a sense that the initiatives that you are building at Andrews for South Africa is going to now garner attention wider and outside of both? In other words, hey, I'm making moves on Andrews campus, I'm making moves back home, but now you say, I want to establish my own design group. Introduce us to your design group and let us know, when did the mission and vision of it hit you? Was it while you were a student? Was it after you graduated? How did you get to this point?
Good question. Again, loaded. um, I'll start here. I don't think people fully understood who I am,
Talk about that.
you know,
Yeah.
throughout like the whole thing. It's like because everyone like whenever I did something like, oh my gosh, you're doing global things, you're doing great things. I'm like, yo, I've always been global. Like
Yeah.
I'm literally international. That's why I'm here. So I can't think only about this
Yeah.
context. So I think what Andrews did was I came in, I was like, man, this is like a very rich environment for me. Like I would have students walking by, oh man, I'm just a poor college student. And I'd laugh, I'm like, bro, you don't know what poor is. uh, you know what I mean?
Sure. Sure.
You don't know what poor is. And I was just like, I am going to have the time of my life out here. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like it's going to like another universe and everyone doesn't understand what they
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
But you do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, you know what? Since no one is seeing the gold, I'm going to show them. I'm going to like sort of take advantage of it.
Right.
And you remember this when I was in college. I just like practically just took advantage of every opportunity
Everything. Yep.
I
Yep.
could to make an impact. Yeah, I was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? To me, it was like, oh, I'm in Disneyland. And to everyone else, they're like, oh, we're in hell. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to live here.
Right.
I can't wait to go back to New York. Go back. Oh, whatever. I was like, all right, word. So
Back to New York.
like yeah, So I'm like, okay, cool. So how do I take advantage of every opportunity at my disposal?
Mm.
Number one, I quickly learned that architecture, like they only taught us like 1 week of African architecture, and it was all about Egypt. And then within that week, they managed to say, oh, all of architecture started from Africa, and that's where you get the Greco-Romans, the Renaissance, the Baroque, and they told us like like the columns, the orders, all of these things which are now anchors of what we see as Western architecture
Sure.
is actually borrowed or stolen from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, word, okay. And then they spent the other 52 weeks, 51 weeks teaching us about European architecture. I'm like, man, why would you teach us more about how you about the original?
Right.
So that's quickly told me that your architecture is not for people like you or from where you're from, because I'm not from Egypt.
Mm,
Never been to Egypt. Still haven't been to Egypt.
mm.
So I was like, well, I guess my people never contributed to the space. And of
Wow.
course that's not true, but that was not taught. So
Mercy, mercy, mercy. Goodness.
I quickly started disengaging and losing interest. And I
Yeah.
was like, man, but I have a full scholarship, so I'll still attend the class. But I was like, man, this is trash. And that's the thing. I always had this sixth sense, again, coming from that shanty town, where I could always see beyond the screen.
Right.
Even though I couldn't tell what it was, I was like, this is not what it is.
There's
you
something
know,
else. There's something else.
there's something else.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what I would do is, like, I started getting involved. I started something called Triple X to address the issues of date rape that were happening on campus at the time.
Mm.
And just like this anonymous conversation where I would have panelists, students, male, female, a psychologist, had someone from Yale, etc., and would have this conversation. They ended up becoming like the most packed conversations on campus, because you realize how hungry people were to discuss this quote unquote taboo topic in a Christian campus, and folks would text in. And I had to fight through some uh, politics with
Yeah.
campus ministries. But
Yeah.
then again, I was like, man, y'all don't know where I'm from. I was able to make it happen. So that's really where my leadership journey started.
Okay.
And I tried to run for RVP. I tried to apply to be an RA. I lost both.
Mm.
Again, folks didn't know who I am. And when that happened, I was like, man, I was devastated. I was like,
Yeah.
yo, just I'm just trying to make an impact. Like, why are they rejecting me like this? And
Yeah.
that's when I started Triple X, and it became the most attended event. And it taught me a lesson. I was like, man, I don't need other people's approval to be a leader. All I need is me and God, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that. And then that's translated to architecture school. I was like, man, I don't need these folks to teach me about African architecture. I'm from Africa. So let me start my own Ubuntu Design Group and challenge them.
Mm.
So that's how Ubuntu Design Group started, and started designing these homes. And then within a couple of months, I was selected as one of the young leaders who are changing the world. It's One Young World. I competed against kids from Harvard and Yale. It's a social venture business challenge.
Cool.
Won that, joined, ended up at South by Southwest top six finalists in the world in design, and then United Nations talk about our work. So it started like this ripple effect.
Right.
And then the next thing, the school comes back to us like, hey, actually, maybe we're wrong. You were right about like architecture and social impact. Let's change our whole curriculum, our master's curriculum, and come down with you to South Africa. Instead of you just doing one house at a time, we'll do the whole community.
Wow.
I was like, bet. And that's
Yeah.
how, we took things to the next level.
Okay. So Ubuntu Design Group um, says that you seek to fulfill that loophole that you spoke to earlier. You talked about if a person doesn't have dignified housing, then that creates a cycle of poverty. So you're now responding to that through the Ubuntu Design Group. I am because we are. So how do you actually invite the participation of the community into home development?
So we came down to South Africa.
Okay.
We designed a home for a family named them Charlie's. The mother had worked at a daycare for 10 years, but she's handicapped. She has unequal legs. The father was in a car accident in the 90s, so she's on a wheelchair. He's on a wheelchair. They've given away their 15-year-old son um, due to lack of, dignified living conditions.
Sure.
We worked with them. We'd do like a process called listening to build. And the idea is that we don't come in as experts.
Wow.
No one knows best where they're going to live, and the people are actually going to live there.
Yeah.
So we let them tell us how to live. We pay attention to how they've already been trying to solve those problems. We had cookouts and provide food, and the community would come, and we're just like, hey guys, here's our drawings. Rip them apart. Let us know what works, what doesn't. And we'd have very intentional conversations.
Yeah.
We'd meet with the kids. We'd meet with the high school kids. We'd meet with the college architecture kids, we meet with the Izinduna as a local chief. We wanted everyone's perspective as we are designing their own community because we believe that the family and the community should be the lead architect in the design of the vision of their own place community, which is something that was stripped away from them due to apartheid architecture,
Yeah.
where they were forced to live in labor camps as just laborers for white people,
Mm-hmm.
and how that's created a cycle of poverty through this thing called the 40-40 rule. They were put 40 kilometers away from town to be 40 square meters, which forced people to spend 40% of their income commuting. And what that does is it's then disenfranchises them from being able to develop their own communities. So 27 years post-apartheid, those communities are still poor and
Wow.
the economic opportunities are still centralized in white areas. So how do we start changing that? So it's not just about the house, it's about the commercial space. How
Mm-hmm.
do we start incorporating more commercial spaces and businesses within our neighborhood that we can live there? So I started working on all these things. And in the middle of all of this, and I looked at them Charlies, I was like, man, why do I care so much? I think that's a question I get a lot. Like, why do I care so much? Like, why? Because I can't take it out. It just, it is what it
It
is,
is.
you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I care so much because unlike other people who are seeing an obese, handicapped statistic, I
Yeah.
see myself.
Wow.
I see my family. I see my own condition.
Mm.
And and it also hit me at that time because I took a break from my college to just come and build this house, and I was just doing this by myself, and it was tough. And I was like, yo, when I like was clearly articulating my vision to the mayor and trying to get that scholarship, to be honest, a part of me was just thinking, let me just finesse this and go to America.
Yeah.
And then we'll see, what happens. May never come back.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, man, I actually meant it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And
Yeah.
it's a big part of who I am. I am because they are. And I was living up to that vision, that manifesto I wrote at the age of 18. So that's a huge blessing. I'm not sure if that's answered your question. I even forgot what the question was, but that,
It did. It did.
man.
And it answered it and then some. I really just wanted us to be able to have a peek into the Ubuntu Design Group process. And you let us know it begins with listening to build. It's hard to and virtually impossible to create. And I think that history has shown already how many building initiatives have taken place without consulting the recipients of the building initiatives. We've come from America, we've come from some distant land to bring you now this house, this church, this building. And here we build it, we wave, we take a picture, and then we leave, not having asked, is this going to be of any practical value? Have we set up something that can be economically sustained, right? So, and on and on and on. So I love how you are starting with those who will receive and have to use and take up space here. And so definitely, definitely. Anything else you wanted to say too that I've missed about the Ubuntu Design Group and the process and mission and vision of it?
Yeah, man, it's not just about listening to build, right? It's about listening to build and then building to enable. Could a
Okay.
house be more than just a house? Could it be an economic generating engine, right?
Sure.
Could it have a commercial space? And realize a lot of the projects in America, the ghettos, the township in South Africa, they're designed to force people to stay poor. It's these
Mhm.
boxes that you can never add on to. But how do you design with flexibility, anticipating that the family grows in income, they
Mm.
grow in number? Um, you know, uh, and then it's not just about designing to enable, it's about enabling Ubuntu. So it's enabling community, right? So it's not about the house or the commercial space or the church or the school or the parks. It's
Yeah.
about all of these things coming together to create a holistic and a dignified neighborhood. And I
Yeah.
think, so yeah, I think that's really what we stand for till today, using architecture as a vehicle to uplift communities, creating a world where everyone has access to dignified design
Yeah.
and financial inclusion.
So you're a leader amongst, I believe, 199 other leadership, Obama Foundation leadership development program. Describe what your experience has been like. What are you learning? what's on the horizons? What are some initiatives that you all are studying and spearheading together?
Oh yeah, man. I see you did your homework. You know the exact number. Respect. Uh, yeah. As a result of this work, caught the eye of President Obama and his foundation. I got selected out of 20,000 applicants as part of the
Mm-hmm.
200 to make the Obama Fellowship or Obama Leadership Program. And then out of that, I was part of the five that President Obama invited over to his Obama Summit in Chicago in 2019 November,
Mm-hmm.
where I got to sit in a panel with architects that Obama has hired to design his presidential center and share ideas and talk about different concepts. Um, I don't know, man. I think OBZ has been very instrumental in my leadership role. First, from a distance, when I was in America, I used to watch all his weekly updates. It
Right.
got me really excited. Seeing your brother up there who's so cool
Yeah.
and articulate and educated, and he represented everything that my community would want out of me. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then now being a part of his like mentees, that's
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
It
You
is.
know, crazy. And walking into like the room and meeting all these other folks, I remember I had like I I felt some sort of way when I first arrived to meet
Yeah.
the other. I walk into my room and this kid is like, "Hey, what's up, man?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I was like, bro, so like, where you from?" He's like, "I'm from Comoros." Never heard of the country.
Right.
I was like, "Pe Comoros." I quickly Google it. It's like, actually, it's a small island right next to Madagascar. I was like, bet. I was like, so what do you do? It's like, yeah, man, I run a $5 million business that works with Google, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. Okay. I walk outside, I meet a lady who's like in a suit. And I was like, hey, how you doing? He's like, I'm Wandile. It's like, she's like, I'm so and so. I was like, what do you do? It's like, oh, I advise the president of Zambia. I was
Mercy.
like, okay. So I was like, yo, this is crazy. How did I make it? And I
True.
quickly learned that actually I was one of the youngest, if not the youngest. I
Mm-hmm.
was 25 when I came in 2019. And it was between 25 and 40. You know, a
Oh,
lot of these cats had, so I was just like, man, I'm just happy to be here. You
yeah.
know?
I'm glad to be in the number. For sure.
So the amount of networking, the amount of opportunities, the amount of learning, the amount of emails that I can that I send now
Yeah.
because of that name is extremely um, amazing. But also meeting President Obama and talking to him and learning from him, of
Mm-hmm.
course, it's crazy. Whether it's through Zoom during a COVID year or in person in Chicago,
Right.
um, I don't know, man, just amazing.
So you mentioned it earlier that there are some key differences between United States civil rights history and South Africa's apartheid history. And then there are also some similarities in terms of the principles that inform both, right? Um,
100%.
I think one similarity that we can see is that there are still vestiges of a very deeply entrenched racial history, and the tensions that are connected to that history in both countries. And
100%.
in your opinion, why is that? What continues to fuel this ongoing narrative of difficult relations based on race? Why isn't it that in 2021 we have arrived at this place of just, everybody, whether you're black, white, red, yellow, green, purple, you can look back and say, you know what, that was then, this is now, let's forge a new path forward. Why do we still have difficulties as recent as a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, I think it's because everyone doesn't want to be called racist, but no one wants to be anti-racist.
Okay. Mm,
So what does that mean? It means we all want to sing Nelson Mandela and MLK's Kumbaya, we're better together, or even President Obama, together, we're stronger together, blah, blah, blah. But no one wants to actually act on it. Like, oh, if we're better together, you inherited this $50 million home based off the back of my parents' or grandparents,
Right.
slave labor, or apartheid labor in this case, why don't you sell it and split the check if we're
Mm.
better together, right? The land you're in is stolen land, but you have a title deed,
Wow.
right? And all these black communities in their native home are living in these really crowded shacks where if COVID breaks out, everyone gets wiped out. You have the opportunity to change that. Instead of singing we're better together, why don't you give back their land?
Mm.
Right. So I don't know, man. I think if we were less fake and more authentic about actually wanting to change and being willing to sacrifice, then maybe 2020 will look different, but or 2021 will look different.
Yeah.
But I think we're more interested in the lip service of change than we are in the actions and sacrifices that come with it.
Yeah. Sacrifice is different in speech than it is in action. I think that this is a part of why some people are a little bit, what's the word, exhausted of continuing to reference the speeches and the verbalizing of a dream and of certain tenets from the likes of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Stephen Biko, Nelson Mandela, and we can go on, because what often happens when we continue to just reference what they said is you forget what they did. Again,
Mm,
you mentioned the years former President Mandela spent incarcerated. And I've had the chance on two occasions to visit Robben Island and see where he stayed and to get a sense just of the psychological torment of being on that island, being able to see Table Mountain on a clear day, and for decades not go to the mainland. I mean, psychologically, that is tormenting. It's torturous, right? And yes, we now can easily read back into that history what we know ultimately happened. He is liberated, he becomes the first democratically elected president, right? But that wasn't every freedom fighter's experience. You know, the hundreds of persons who fought, spilled blood, shed tears, they didn't become president, right? Many of them didn't even go and pursue political careers. Same thing in the States. Martin Luther King Jr. is a voice, a figurehead, as it were. And I think he is worthy of maybe some people feel a little away about the word worthy. He deserves, I believe, commendation, affirmation for the seeds planted, for the foundation laid. But he would even say that there were countless, nameless, for all intents and purposes, faceless contributors to this movement, persons who couldn't go and march, but they gave money. And so I think you're right. Like our generation, and I think you're one of them, um, has people who are recognizing, hey, wait a minute, the foundation was never laid for us just to reference what was said in the past and then just use our voices. At some point, we have to be willing to put our feet on the ground. And what I love about what you're doing, and others in our generation, is your feet are on the ground, right? But your feet aren't on the ground with pride. They're on the ground with humility. You're saying, hey, in order for us to move forward, we're going to have to listen to one another. That's kind of one of my core values, is how can we learn if we're not willing to listen? And for me, that's one of the reasons why these very antiquated ways of going about life persist, is because what happens is it becomes very difficult to listen. And when listening is dismantled, then you significantly curb your learning potential. And when you curb your learning potential, whatever lifestyle results is the lifestyle that you're going to try to perpetuate for survival. And I think that's what's happened, right? For generations, one generation's been told you are superior to everyone. And what's happened with that is you cut off your ears and you can't hear any other perspective, right? Um, so I hope that change continues to happen. I don't know if it'll happen on a governmental or systemic level as quickly as we want it to, but I think where we are as young men who have a chance to lend our influence, I mean, your influence is a lot larger than mine right now, brother. You're on a global level. But wherever you are, when you're able to lend that influence, I think those themes, as they're continuing to be pushed. And let me just say this final thing, and I don't want to hog this segment of the conversation, but I think it requires of us a renewed thickening of our skin to be able to sit in difficult conversations, right? So I don't want to paint this with like, glitter to make it seem like this is easy work. Hard conversations have to take place. Introspection is required. Repentance is required. And none of these things are easy to do. There's going to be a level of accountability that's required as community to let each other know, hey, you're on the wrong path here. So yeah, I agree with you, man, that hopefully something will change in the future.
Yeah. So that's heavy. Where do I start? But I'll say this: I've had hard conversations though.
Mhm.
I've had what I would call Fox News conversations at Andrews, where folks act like they want to know, act like they want to come to some conclusion, but in reality, they're just cueing you to say you're wrong and apologize to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, especially within religious circles.
Hmm.
So don't engage folks like that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be very careful with our mental, our time. Just, I think hard conversation for actual people who are truly interested. And you can tell that, to be honest, within the first few minutes of a conversation, and
Sure.
just walk out. You have no obligation to be talking to a white supremacist who's just trying to convert you to realize that he's superior. I'm like,
Yeah.
yo. So that's one. Number two, I feel like I'm at that point, also very similar age. I was born 1994 when, Nelson became president. I'm
Mhm.
27 years, so 20 years. So like my existence is a marker of how old we've come out of apartheid, right?
Yeah.
When apartheid happened. So, I'm 27 years. I'm at the same point where Obama was also starting to get tired of the grassroots.
Yeah.
Starting to get like, oh man, maybe here's Obama's evolution, right? Grassroots. And then it's like, too slow.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the real change. I feel like I'm hitting the rock. But these folks at the city hall that I have to go lobby and knock on, they seem to have the power.
Yeah.
They seem to, it's like, I don't want to be a politician. I want to lead movements, but seems like the power is there. So I'm going
Yeah.
to go to law school and understand these policies. And I'm going to come back and run this joint.
Hmm.
So he goes to law school, lives more, comes back, he runs local, national, ends up becoming president and starts, bringing policies. And when he becomes president, it's like, oh, I was wrong. I didn't realize that like you actually don't have the power, even at this
Yeah.
level, to bring about as much change. And I think he had a reckoning with himself up there, like, maybe grassroots is the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find other kids who have my same passion, and I'm going to give them resources through Obama leadership and Obama fellowship, and that's what he's doing now. So that's the life
Right.
cycle of Obama from what I've studied.
Right.
I am at the point where I am tired of grassroots, and I'm like, okay, two things are important: money and
Hmm.
politics.
Mm.
So we need to run and control our means of economy, and we also need to be able to run politics in order for us to bring about change. I don't know what that means, but these are the two things that are very important to me right now. And looking at like, so what's the next step? How do we create wealth and
Yeah.
keep it within our communities rather than go and buy at Macy's,
Right.
right? Like, how do we buy at Richard Martin's,
Mercy.
right?
That sounds good.
How do we buy at Wandile Mthiyane?
Yeah.
So I'm deeply involved in engaging with thought leaders around business, but also jumping into ventures and helping in different ways to start creating some of those systems. But I'm also looking at, political avenues as well, how to sort of like push and make sure that we are not forgotten in the policies, we are not forgotten like in the housing development. Clearly these cats are not doing their jobs. Someone has to do it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'd encourage a lot of young folks to really think about going into business to create wealth for their communities,
Sure.
local businesses, and that's social impact business is what it's called.
Okay.
And in many ways, Ubuntu Design Group is attempting to be that.
Right.
Hire local recent graduates who wouldn't otherwise get a job at a white firm because they're Black.
Yeah.
Right. And then, in addition to that, go and become Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez and run.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
The elections and be the change that you want to see.